president is the whistleblower here. The president of the United States is the whistleblower. And this individual is a saboteur trying to undermine a democratically elected government.
Well, that is Stephen Miller, one of President Trump's top advisors, turning this whole whistleblower scandal on its head. You see, from the perspective of the White House, this story has been spun upside down. You see, from their point of view, the president did nothing wrong when he asked Ukraine's leader to look into his political rival, Joe Biden. In fact, it's everyone else who's at fault. The whistleblower, a CIA agent, is part of a deep state conspiracy. A senior Democrat, Adam Schiff, is possibly guilty of treason, and the media, of course, are complicit, ignoring the real scandal of how Joe Biden's son made so much money in Ukraine. Confused? Maybe this will help.
Hello, Vladimir.
Hello, Mr. President. How are you?
Today, I'm announcing the House of Representatives moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry.
Impeachment inquiry.
Impeachment inquiry.
Impeachment investigation. Speaker Nancy Pelosi announcing the formal impeachment inquiry into President Trump.
This follows reports that President Trump tried to pressure Ukraine's leader to investigate Vice President Joe Biden and his son.
The complaint centers around a phone call Mr. Trump had with Ukraine's president back in July.
In that call, the president asked for an investigation of Democratic presidential hopeful Joe Biden and his son Hunter, who used to be a director of a Ukrainian oil company.
The question here at the heart of all of this is, did the president threaten to withhold military aid from the Ukrainian government in exchange for an investigation by the Ukrainians into Joe Biden and his son?
He suddenly, unexpectedly withheld about $400 million in military aid to Ukraine. Then, a week later, while that money is withheld, the president has this conversation.
I want to start with first, the transcripts on Ukraine. Yep. President Trump has said he's going to go ahead and authorize and allow them to be released.
After mounting pressure, the White House today released a transcript of a call between Donald Trump and the president of Ukraine.
The president first says the United States has been very good to Ukraine. And then he says, I would like you to do us a favor.
He says, quote, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, what Biden stopped the prosecution. And a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great.
Why on earth would you go to a foreign leader to talk about your political rival?
What those notes reflect is a classic mafia-like shakedown of a foreign leader.
There is more than sufficient evidence to impeach the president.
That document is a smoking gun.
It's a joke. Impeachment for that?
To me, bottom line, no smoking gun.
To impeach any president over a phone call like this would be insane.
There's nothing there.
I think, and you read it, that nobody pushed me. Yes.
In other words, no pressure.
It's just a Democrat witch hunt. Here we go again.
It's the worst witch hunt in political history.
And it shouldn't be allowed. There should be a way of stopping it. Thank you.
Well, a witch hunt, he says. That sort of thing was supposed to have ended in America 3 centuries ago. Anyway, we'll discuss that a little later. First, I want to introduce you to our guest top left there, Lindsay Moran, a former CIA operative. To the right there, Erol Morkoc, who's from Republicans overseas. And in the bottom left, you'll recognize him because he has a record 6 appearances on Nexus. Professor Scott Lucas, who's going to be taking us through, in the first half, through all the evidence. But first, let's take a look at the minutiae of the impeachment process. So right now, the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives is looking at whether President Trump should be impeached. In fact, 6 committees, which were already investigating the president, have been brought under one impeachment inquiry umbrella by the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Now, if they conclude there's reason to impeach Trump, they'll put it to a judicial committee vote, and if passed, the entire House will get a vote. Scott, you believe that the House of Representatives will vote to impeach him, and you back that vote. What is it about this whole Ukraine affair that makes you feel there is a strong case to impeach the president?
Well, to be precise, I back an investigation into the Ukraine affair, whether it leads to impeachment and eventually conviction or not. And that is because this phone call that you've mentioned between Donald Trump and President Zelensky is only part of a bigger story, which is really a 10-month campaign by Donald Trump, especially through his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to put pressure on Ukraine to do a few things. One is, for example, to investigate a conspiracy theory that gives cover for Russia's intervention in the 2016 election, to say, oh, no. The server that hacked Democratic National Committee emails actually came from Ukraine. They have actually tried to create a story or put pressure on Ukraine to create a story that the Trump campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who is serving a 7.5-year prison sentence, was stitched up by the Democrats working with Ukrainians. But the most important thing is that from November 2018, Rudy Giuliani, on behalf of Trump, with meetings across 5 different countries, tried to get Ukraine to open up an investigation into Joe Biden, the former vice president, the 2020 presidential candidate, on the pretext, and an unsupported pretext, that Biden's son, Hunter Biden, who was with the Ukrainian gas company, was somehow involved in corruption, and that Biden fired a prosecutor to protect his boy, none of which is actually true. All of that, if it is found to be true in the investigation, if that is indeed what occurred, is an abuse of presidential power for Trump's personal gain, and it is a possible crime, specifically asking a foreign leader to intervene in a U.S. election.
Scott, let's take that apart. You know, when he told President Zelensky there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that, he's not making that up. There is a lot of talk. You see, Biden's son, Hunter, was on the board of a Ukrainian gas company, Burisma, reportedly earning $50,000 a month. And that company was under investigation by Ukraine's state prosecutor, Viktor Shokin. Shokin confirms this in a statement to a European court. He also submitted that in 2015, Joe Biden pressured Ukraine's president to fire him to stop the investigation. Now, Biden's never denied that he had him fired. He had Shokin fired. In fact, he bragged about it.
I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
But the thing is, Biden says he had Shokin fired not because of the investigation into the company that his son worked for, but because he was incompetent and corrupt. So, Scott, you're inclined to believe Joe Biden's account of events rather than Shokin. Why?
Well, I'm inclined to believe the facts here, Matthew. And what's happened here is that there's two things that have been conflated, and some people have been very mischievous in concocting conspiracy theory. So on the one hand, we have the investigation of the gas company Burisma, but that investigation was closed, and Ukrainian officials have said this, before Hunter Biden joined the board in 2014. Now, on the other hand, we have Joe Biden in 2015, 2016, on behalf of the Obama administration, because he was vice president, going to the Ukraine and telling the government, we're really worried here about corruption, which is rampant through the system. Your prosecutor general isn't investigating that. We just don't think he is fit for the job. And not only Joe Biden, but the European Union was giving that message to the Ukraine. And it was the Ukrainian parliament, not Joe Biden, not the Europeans, the Ukrainian parliament that removed Shokin in March 2016. When the story gets rewritten, it's, oh, well, Shokin wasn't dismissed by the Ukrainian parliament because of international pressure over corruption. It was all some type of stitch up to protect Hunter Biden. And that, of course, is when, let's say, fiction replaces fact.
So when Shokin says in court documents filed in Europe that I was fired because Joe Biden pressured my president to fire me, and I was actively looking into Burisma, he therefore, you think, is lying?
If you're Viktor Shokin, would you rather say that you were removed by your own parliament because you were found to be corrupt by your job, Or would you rather say it was because of Joe Biden and an American plot against you?
The fact is, even if Biden is telling the truth, which you believe he is, he was in charge of US-Ukraine relations under Obama at that time when his son was on the board. And the Washington Post and others said, at the least, looks nepotistic and at worst, nefarious, to quote the Washington Post. So optically, it looked very bad. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I would say this, Matthew. I'd say that, look, if you're talking about U.S. government legislation so that the children of serving government officials cannot hold these positions, I'm fully in support of that.
Okay, what a lot of people find strange, the Democrats and others say the call was incriminating and only came out thanks to the whistleblower, but Trump has countered that argument, tweeting, virtually any time I speak on the phone to a foreign leader, I understand there may be many people listening from various US agencies, not to mention those from the other country itself. No problem. Now, surely, Scott, most people would say Trump would not incriminate himself on a phone call knowing other people are listening.
Well, Donald Trump is a very, very confident person. And indeed, he was so confident that he said, look, let's let this reconstructed transcript be released. It's about 10 minutes of a 30-minute phone call. And his officials, his White House officials said, no, you can't do that. It sets a dangerous precedent. In other words, I think Donald Trump didn't realize the significance of what he had said to President Zelensky. But let me tell you who did understand the significance of it. As soon as that phone call ended, Trump's staff went around to the agencies that had copies of the transcript, the CIA, the State Department, National Security Council, and they asked for all those transcripts to be deleted from hard drives, and the only copies were to be in a highly secured area. Now, that is not normal. In other words, they were rattled by what Trump might have revealed in the conversation, even if Trump didn't recognize it, that they immediately tried to restrict access.
The fact is, for those of you who keep an eye on the news, you may feel that the whistleblower hadn't really revealed much you didn't already know. Just watch this news clip from back in May.
The president's personal attorney heading to Eastern Europe to encourage a foreign government to press ahead with an investigation or two that may very well damage a political rival of his clients. We're talking about Joe Biden.
The reality is I came about this by accident investigating Ukrainian collusion with Democrats to affect the election and also to help create the false narrative against the president. And over the next 3 to 4 months, you're going to find out all about that.
Wasn't he right? Look, that is Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal lawyer, and he said it's his responsibility as his lawyer to investigate what's going on here because it could have an effect on the 2020 election, and it may have had an effect on the 2016 election. So it seems to have been out in the open for us all to know about before this whistleblower ever came along.
Yes, Matt, but there's two key differences. The first is Rudy Giuliani is ostensibly a private individual, not a U.S. government official, and he certainly is not the president of the United States. So there's a difference when Rudy Giuliani exerts pressure and when Donald Trump does. And the second, and I think this is key, is that a few days before Trump spoke with President Zelensky, he suspended, by personal order, almost $400 million of military aid to Ukraine. So in other words, those who criticize Donald Trump would say that the suspension of military aid was being used as leverage only a few days later for Trump to get Zelensky to agree to the investigation of Joe Biden. Rudy Giuliani couldn't do that because Rudy Giuliani doesn't control military aid as the president of the United States.
On that point, though, Scott, there was no explicit linkage, quid pro quo, if you like, between the aid and the possible investigation into Biden. I want to ask you about impeachment process now. If you think the House will vote to impeach, it then moves on to the Senate, which is where the trial actually takes place. It is a Republican-dominated chamber, which means, does it not, that this is going nowhere?
Well, I think it's highly unlikely that Trump will be convicted. It would require 20 of the 53 Republicans in the 100-seat chamber to defect, to switch, and only 3 of them have publicly expressed concern so far. But if there are further revelations, who knows?
Professor Scott Lucas, thank you very much for taking us as far as you have. The president characterizes this whole process as a witch hunt, even going as far as to call it a coup. Let's take a look now at those claims. Witch hunts were a dark chapter in American history, with usually women being accused by superstitious and sometimes vengeful townsfolk. They'd make stuff up, and the defendant would be tried unfairly with little regard for the facts. And from Donald Trump's perspective, that's what he's facing today, a witch hunt, surrounded by accusers seeking to bring him down for their own gain. He believes the CIA whistleblower is partisan and not to be taken seriously, as he hadn't even heard the call personally. As for the person who leaked the info to the whistleblower...
Because that's close to a spy. You know what we used to do in the old days when we were smart, right? With spies and treason, right? We used to handle it a little differently than we do now.
The president's also angry with Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who made up his own version of the Trump call.
I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent, understand lots of it.
Some got the so-called joke, others felt misled. And there are plenty of others he's angry with, but let's skip right to the media, some of which concentrates its firepower 24/7 on the president.
Nearly half of Americans support the impeachment of President Trump.
We have a big story in the Washington Post tonight. It involves a whistleblower complaint,
but barely mentions that Joe Biden's son made huge sums of money in Ukraine, while his dad, the vice president, was in charge of Ukraine-US relations.
But does anybody seriously think if the name was Trump instead of Biden, that the news anchors on Sunday morning would have the same attitude?
Let's bring in our other guest now. Lindsay, you were an operative, not an analyst, but had you been an analyst assigned to the White House, do you think you would have blown the whistle at this point?
I certainly hope so. I certainly would have felt compelled to if I saw what sounds like from the complaint continued and repeated evidence of wrongdoing. And this phone call alone is very damning and very telling. I think one thing that's important...
Which part of it do you find damning?
The fact that the President of the United States is using his presidential power quite clearly, whether it's explicitly stated or not, to ask a favor of a foreign government. This is an administration and a president that has repeatedly denigrated the intelligence community at large and en masse. And I think one thing that needs to be made clear is that everyone who joins the CIA, whether you be an analyst or an operative or someone in administration, is sworn in and swears to uphold the Constitution. And it was made very clear to me when I joined the agency that if I ever saw evidence of wrongdoing, of abuse, of malfeasance, that it was incumbent upon me to report that. Now, you see, within intelligence communities, you see a lot of waste. There's a lot of blurred ethical lines because, let's face it, espionage is a dirty business. That's not so much the case with the analysts. What you never expect to see is the President of the United States or anyone in the administration undermining the intelligence community of the United States and or using their office for personal political gain.
Okay, let me put that to Erol Morkoc. Do you think that the transcript and the whistleblower's complaint is sufficient evidence that he abused his powers?
Oh, absolutely not. The whistleblower complaint, beyond being essentially what appears to a lot of us as a little bit of left-wing fan fiction, reads with an overt directive bias towards the elected president of the United States. It does not contain any first-hand information, and more just incredulously to myself and other of my colleagues in Republican media and strategy, we're baffled that, he went on Fox News, he went on public forums and discussed this. This isn't undercover. The smoking gun in this entire thing was the transcript that Mr. Schiff decided to read, sort of his Romeo and Juliet moment in Congress. It's absurd that the only narrative followed by the people who genuinely, the only people who could ever believe this are the people who genuinely believe that President Trump got this job so he could rent government rate rooms and rent golf carts to the CIA. More importantly, the thing that isn't being talked much, but is coming out of this, is the precedent that's about to be set, that an ousted regime of corrupt individuals that Americans said no mas to can now turn around and declare themselves candidates to gain some sort of pseudo immunity against their prior misdeeds. I mean, that is the most un-American thing I can believe. So the president has pointed out that the person behaving in this manner is behaving as a spy in a lot of ways. If what is true, if it's in bad faith, if they're ideological whistleblowers, they're not the same thing. They're operatives, and that's a huge issue. And the American people can see that present and clear.
Lindsay, let's talk about something a bit technical here. The Whistleblower Act, which the whistleblower used in order to file his complaint. Some have said that that act was intended to give the whistleblower the freedom to complain about what was happening inside the intel community, not to complain about their political masters. Are they right or wrong about that?
Well, that's certainly true, that the intention of the Whistleblower Act is not so that anyone can voice petty grievances or political grievances, but I would say that is certainly not the case we have here. And to claim that this whistleblower is a spy does a fundamental disservice and is an insult to people who join the intelligence community largely to serve their country. One of the problems with the Whistleblower Act is that people within the intelligence community are not really protected as well as they could be. In fact, they don't have that safety net that a lot of other people in federal government and private industry are afforded by the Whistleblower Act. So I just want to point out that this complaint, and reading it, I knew immediately it was from a professional CIA analyst, a civil servant who is serving our country. This complaint was not some kind of petty grievance on the part of a political hack. Everybody at the CIA, the director on down, parks their politics at the door when they are going into the professional business of spying or being an analyst.
Erol, come in.
I have to say the whistleblower on the second to last page concludes with, and I quote, "I do not know definitively whether the below-mentioned decisions are connected to the efforts I am describing." What does that mean? They are throwing dirt and seeing what sticks. It stinks to high heaven that a whistleblower with an ideological agenda can sort of start a discussion and put it into reality when they have no firsthand knowledge. It is very, very suspicious that this kind of behavior is coming out. The Whistleblower Act is there to protect real whistleblowers. As Stephen Miller said, to be a whistleblower is an honorific thing, and this demeans that quite a bit.
Okay, clearly you two are not going to agree on that. So let's turn to Adam Schiff. We're running out of time. The senior Democrat who's taking the lead in this impeachment inquiry. Have a listen.
I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent, understand lots of it. On this and on that, I'm going to put you in touch with people, and not just any people. I'm going to put you in touch with Attorney General of the United States, my Attorney General, Bill Barr. He's got the whole weight of the American law enforcement behind him.
Well, a lot of what Schiff was saying there wasn't what the president actually said. He described it as a parody, Schiff did, and the president was furious, tweeting, "Adam Schiff illegally made up a fake and terrible statement, pretended it to be mine as the most important part of my call to the Ukrainian president, and read it aloud to Congress and the American people. It bore no relationship to what I said on the call, arrest for treason, ? Basically, here's the question, Lindsay. Was Adam Schiff, as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, behaving irresponsibly when he misquoted the president, albeit as a parody?
Sure, because I think he did a disservice to the overall and more important argument that we have a president of the United States who is using his office for political purposes.
Erol, you want to come in on that?
Well, Adam Schiff basically came on, and I assume perhaps he took a high school drama class or wanted to have his moment in the sun, and he went out there and read what, I mean, in his mind, he was showing an example, but let's take it back to like the reality. What happens is people are going through airports, they're going through bars, they're waking up before work, before putting their kids to school, and that's not going to be shown in its full context. It's shown in snippets. It's a subversive way of getting a lie out into the American public, a false narrative.
And just a quick prediction from you both. Erol, do you think that the president will be removed from office via impeachment?
I absolutely do not believe he will be removed by office by impeachment. I think there is a 20% chance that somehow in the comedy that is the American House of Representatives, that somehow they could do it, but that would be the lowest chance. Absolutely not. Trump will take this, turn it, and win on a landslide 2020, guaranteed.
Lindsay, your predictions going forward?
It's hard to tell. I think the first thing is to get an investigation underway, because I think there is what concerns me is what we have not seen. What concerns me are the telephone conversations that are not recorded or that have already been deleted or obliterated or moved elsewhere. So I think in the interest of the American people, a full investigation is required.
And Lindsay, do you think that the president will be impeached and removed from office as a result of this phone call?
I don't know that it will be a result of this particular phone call, but I would think that a full investigation into his activities and his relationships with foreign intelligence services and foreign powers would probably result in an impeachment.
Okay, well, Lindsay Moran and Erol Morkoc, thank you very much for your contributions to The Nexus. And thank you very much for watching. And if you want to see this episode or any others, you can go to our YouTube channel. Till next week, goodbye.